Hello and welcome to the Barcast. I'm your host, Nick Barr, coming to you on a lovely fall Wednesday afternoon here in New York. We're carrying on with the seven, and today we're going to talk about the sexual seven. So remember that the seven's passion is gluttony, a voracious appetite for experience importantly, without really digesting those experiences. So it's more of a tasting kind of gluttony. And the sexual seven's passion keyword is suggestibility, sugestionabilidad. So let's learn about that now. The sexual seven is not earthly but celestial. They are not interested in the things of this world. It is the gluttony for things from a higher and more advanced world. The sexual seven is what we might call a dreamer. To define it, Ichazo used the word suggestibility, which I understand as the passion for imagining something better than the desolate reality. It's the passion for enchanting reality, for fantasizing, for painting things in a rosy hue. In other words, it's a form of idealization. Now, if the word for the social five is totem, totemizing being a type of super idealization, here it's more about the idealization of the ordinary. The sexual seven looks at things with the optimism of those who are in love. They say love is blind. It could be that the sexual seven is blind in the same way. They are overly enthusiastic. Their passion is dreaming, of going toward the sweetness of what is imagined instead of connecting with the ordinary and not so interesting reality. Carrie Abraham, a collaborator of Freud who had a better eye for character descriptions than Freud, spoke of a completely optimistic character in every sense. I'm fine, you're fine, everything is fine. And naturally, this can be very therapeutic for anyone except a seven. Or put it another way, virtuous life is good for anyone who is not a nun. So that's the introduction to the sexual seven. And let's learn more from Enrique Villatoro in Transformation of the Sexual Seven. He writes, aspects that are left behind in the therapeutic process: thinking. Nowadays, I feel more distrust toward rational thinking. And so remember thinking, feeling, doing as the three faculties of the Enneagram. And we're in the thinking triad with the seven. And we're wrapping up the thinking triad. We're going to be doing next. And so the seven, using the language of Suzanne Stabile, experiences the world through thinking, through that control tower up here in their head. What do I think? What do I think? What do other people think? They're planners. And then they, what am I going to do about that? So they think and then they do. And then they do and then they think and then they think and then they do. And they're feeling repressed. So let's carry that into these descriptions. Nowadays, I feel more distrust toward rational thinking and more belief in sensation and instinct. I don't listen so much to the intellectual flow, which makes it easier for me to silence that internal mental noise of multiple possibilities, plans, opportunities, exciting ideas, etc. This inner silencing also manifests externally with more silence, speaking less. Gone is the rambling on and getting excited about one's own speech. Now there is more precision and the ability to better use language, both in exact words and in structuring speech. I can express with more accuracy what I want to convey. I don't feel the same need to externalize those wonderful ideas and possibilities that arise in my mind because even I don't believe them. They are much less important, they captivate me less, and they don't hypnotize me so much. And he adds, it's similar with constant planning, fewer pipe dreams, etc. No need for, or less need for, anticipatory strategies. So that's the balance of this overthinking, which is characteristic of the 5, 6, and 7. But in this subtype of the 7, it's this fantasizing thinking. As I've said before with other parts of the 7, the 7s are quite likable. Their passions are some of the most pro-social. The person who's just really excited, they're a chatterbox. They want to tell you everything that happened to them, that they're thinking about, that might happen, that they want to do. And there's this enchantment. I don't know if the word enchantment has been used here, but that's a keyword level word that's coming for me. An enchantment with what is. Onto feeling. There's more generalized sensitivity. Emotions are more on the surface, from sadness, anger, pain, frustration, to joy, satisfaction, contentment. It's a feeling that is apparently less intense, but more real, more authentic. I could compare it to taking off rose-colored glasses to see the darker colors. That is, to feel and bear the pain, frustration, and discouragement more, and without manipulating one's perception of reality. Dissatisfaction and what displeases are felt and manifested more clearly and directly. There's less self-deception, falsehood, and manipulation. There's more transparency with oneself and others in the expression of feelings, pleasant or unpleasant, saying what you want or don't want. With this greater integrity and transparency in disagreements, passive-aggressive rebellion, hidden resistance, biting irony, etc. diminish. There's more honesty. Less restlessness, less anxiety. So they're going straight to the transformation piece here of what they're reporting on the other side of their work. And yeah, we should talk about this rose-colored glasses idea for a second. I really love this metaphor that another Enneagram teacher, his name is Tom LaHue, used, which is, imagine you're on a radio and you're tuning the radio for a song that you like, but static comes on or a song that you don't like, and you turn the volume of the radio down. His claim, and I think it's a credible one, is the sevens actually begin by, and this is all unconscious, turning the volume down on the emotional intensity of experience so that they aren't hurt by the negative experiences. So they've turned the radio down overall. Then what they need to do is they need to turn the volume up on positive experiences. So they want the most positive things. They're maybe drawn to extreme sports or the busiest, most hip restaurant, etc. They need to dial up the intensity of experience, of positive experience, to compensate for this initial dialing down of volume, right? So they need loud music to compensate for having turned down the volume on the radio. So the rose-colored glasses here is another metaphor, and I think it's a helpful one. But I think it's a key point that the seven has done something in the first place to mute the experience. In either case, the transformation is in the ending of manipulation of one's perception of reality. That's essentially the redemption, the virtue, the redeeming virtue of the seven, which is sobriety. Sobriety is the cessation of manipulation of perception. And on the one hand, sobriety sometimes, as Viatora writes, is sometimes less, what does he write? Less intense, potentially, but we also experience sometimes sober perception as incredibly intense. And I think you have to hold that ambiguity there. And then finally, behavior or doing, if we want to do the thinking, feeling, doing triad. Behavior, first, there's a considerable reduction in physical movement. Yeah, so remember, the seven is this active, intellectual, nimble, evasive type. This implies greater stability, being able to stay still for longer in one place with one activity. Awareness is taken that the moment is now, here and now. More balanced way of being. The world is no longer a vast marketplace of extraordinary opportunities that must be seized, where the more you take, the more you have and enjoy. Although this caused much excitement and enthusiasm due to the many scenarios it opened up, the emotional cost was high due to the dispersion and anxiety caused by the difficulty of not being able to be in all the scenarios at once and having to give something up. Against that dispersion of multiple possibilities and experiences, something more concrete, routine, disciplined, and austere now emerges, valuing situations of greater quality and depth. Now the great and tempting external world has been reduced to a smaller scope: home, work, family, a few relationships, spirituality, and little else. The focus of attention is more inward than outward. From looking and prioritizing the external, the public, the outside, there has been a shift to valuing the internal, the personal, less spectacular and outwardly bright, but more personal, intimate, simple, and deep. As the saying goes, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Opportunism has diminished. Although it's less in quality, I go deeper, I digest more. That so promising future I used to sell myself is no longer credible. Automatically, more attention is paid to the real, to the present. The sexual seven acts like someone who enters a bakery and orders a little of everything to try it all, even mixing different flavors. In doing so, they don't distinguish between nuance, and satisfaction consists solely in having tried everything, in not having missed anything. Now I enjoy just eating one cake and savoring it. In short, I feel more satisfied. So, a lot of good stuff here. And I think it's important to just spend a little bit more time. It's interesting. I think this may be one of those chapters where it's all about the new me, which is great. But I noticed so far that, this is a lot of the after picture, which would be characteristic of the seven. You will see that from time to time, that you get hints of the person's type by how they choose to tell the story of transformation. And so this chapter might sort of skew on the post-transformation glow. So knowing that we need to spend a little bit more time with, remind me what's so bad about being a seven. Remind me what's so bad about seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, tasting everything, living life to the fullest, experiencing all the experiences that you can. And again, I really do think that it's important to acknowledge that potentially nothing. There might not be anything wrong with that. It might be a path that works for a lot of people. But from the perspective of really being there and thinking about when you go back and think about your own life events that stand out as particularly meaningful, some of them may be in the midst of crisis. There may be a death where you're with somebody in their last moments. There may be, even in your own personal breakdown, some kind of clarity or truth or understanding that comes out. And it may be the case that a sexual seven's enchantment with the world gets shattered by one of these crises. So that's one way in for a seven, is the shattering of enchantment. Another way in may be getting signal from their loved ones that they don't feel like they're really there, that you're so busy, that you're always doing things, that you're running around, that when I'm having a hard day, you're trying to make me feel better. But what I really need you to sit with me and just listen. So the seven may get external feedback. And then speaking to what Naranjo calls the ontic vacuum, underneath every passion, there's some emptiness that the passion operates to obfuscate. So the passion is this engine, it's this energy source that is a sort of self-perpetuating diesel energy that in part exists to mask its own emptiness or lack of sustainability. That there's sort of another energy source, call it solar energy. There's clean energy available, but diesel energy works A, and B works in such a way that you need it. And so any type might kind of recognize that emptiness in some way. And I think the 7 is, in a way, their emptiness is maybe most apparent. Despite being really great and pro-social, there's a fundamental shallowness to avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. There's a way that is turning away from half of life, and that half of life is there, and the 7 knows that it's there. So going back to that fear is the wisdom of the ontic vacuum for the 7. And underneath the enchantment in the case of the sexual 7, or even sacrifice for the self-preserving 7, there may be fear of what lies beneath, of what has not been dug into, that might manifest as anxiety and restlessness. And the way that the sexual 7 is going to tackle their anxiety and restlessness is through more experience, through more tasting, through falling in love with something new or someone new. And over time, the sexual 7 may get really exhausted by that, or just recognize on some deep level the shallowness of that lifestyle. So I just want to speak to that passion in case that it doesn't come up later in this chapter. Devotion, humility, compassion. The change comes by recognizing and delving into what's behind that search for greatness, for self-interest, for taking advantage of situations. On the one hand, there's the feeling of being small, insecure, and to some extent inferior. On the other hand, there's a deep distrust that authority will be fair and grant security and protection. You can hear the 6 wing there. With this way of thinking, it seemed more reliable to become one's own reference, one's own authority, with a self-serving sense of justice, security, and self-protection. And then you can hear the 8 wing there. A 7's mind is programmed toward survival and cleverness. In almost any situation, the thought and plan of how to get something out of it arises. So that's really important. And spend a little bit more time with it. And let's apply the 6 and 8 wings, because this is something Naranjo only gestures at briefly, and you don't see it used much in the Enneagram, but you can, for every type, you can understand that type purely through the wings, a negotiation of the wings. And this paragraph illustrates that really beautifully for the 7. So over here on one side, the 7 feels insecure, unsafe, small, inferior, threatened, right? Afraid, fear. I must seek safety. I must avoid being hurt. But on the other hand, there's a deep distrust of authority that manifests itself in a particular way. But this deep distrust of authority, one holds in one's mind, I can only rely on myself. I can only rely on my own authority. So that's not a 6 response, right? The 6 lacks self-authority. This is, there's no one I can rely on but myself. I got to look out for number 1, a self-serving sense of justice, security, and self-protection. That's the 8. This amoral look out for number 1. No one can dominate me. I won't let anyone, etc. So now you have this polarization between 6 energy and 8 energy. On the one hand, feeling small and threatened and scared. On the other hand, not reliant on anyone, a self-serving sense of justice, etc. And that, how does that come together? It comes together in this kind of trickster, intellectual, nimble harlequin. Sometimes I think of the court jester. They survive by looking out for themselves in a way that is non-threatening and even potentially self-diminishing. So that's the 6 and the 8 polarized. And in that polarization, the 7 emerges. The antidote to all this behavior we're talking about is commitment to oneself and to what one wants and desires. It's giving oneself permission to be transparent and honest, expressing more clearly what one wants or what bothers them. Clear demands can be expressed, and the frustration of one's desire and lack can be more easily tolerated. This honesty and transparency with oneself and the world is the antidote to rebellion and hidden conspiracy. Rebellion, 8, conspiracy, 6. And neither is fully expressed. They're both diverted through the strategy of the 7, which is the nimble, intellectual, entertainer / evader type. Paradoxically, there's less interest in social relationships and people in contacts. With the psychospiritual process, greater awareness of the antisocial aspect of the 7 arises. Remember that 7 and 5 are linked. I have more desire to be with myself or with my loved ones, and not so much to discover those who are more distant. So the 7, through that lens, is sort of owning up to this prior fear of violation of boundary. This job of cheering up, as Naranjo said at the beginning, sort of cheering up the depressed mother as one archetype there. There's a deeper possibility. It's still a wounded response, but it's still just like, I just want to be by myself. I don't want to have the needs of others impinge, intrude, invade me. So part of their path toward honesty is time by themselves. The general feeling is one of maturity, of becoming more adult, serious, sensible, and judicious. To stop feeling like a child dependent on the world and instead assume responsibilities. Maturity implies greater resilience to pain and frustration. Instead of stopping to feel lack feeling, the typical trap of the sexual 7 is that the frustration of not having something is replaced by a rosy fantasy that provides substitute satisfaction. So that's the move on a sort of molecular level, moving frustration into fantasy. The mental insistence is such, with logical arguments that sustain the fantasy, that one begins to enjoy it in advance. That means disconnecting from the discomfort caused by lack. The illusion is built to avoid it, and gradually one loses touch with reality, to the point that, dragging more and more into one's lies, the sexual 7 becomes unable to distinguish fantasy from reality. Remember, this is the schizoid type, this sort of splitting. The interruption of this avoidance cycle, and I think, avoidance and attraction are arguably good stand-ins also for fear in the thinking triad and shame in the heart triad. So avoidance, I think, is a really key word for 5s, 6s, and 7s. This interruption of the avoidance cycle is achieved when the impulse of one's desire is sustained without necessarily acting on it, both in its aspect of attraction to the new and stimulating and in the avoidance of the unpleasant, the frustration, and the painful. I.e., one can experience real wanting. One can experience one's own desire and cut it from acting on it, either in what they're fleeing toward or fleeing from. And that's, I think, part of sobriety, right? Sobriety is sustained presence with what is, including one's feeling towards love of the flower and its smells, or the aroma, or the taste of the wine, or the taste of the food. But being with all of that and not chomping for the next bite. All right. Anything else we want to touch on here? I think there's more kind of recapitulation. The spirituality of a transformed sexual 7 is not so fantastic or ideal. Remember, we also saw that with the previous 7, a move away from idealism, but more practical and materialized in concrete actions and deeds. For example, it involves developing generosity, collaborations, and more altruistic and selfless tasks, as well as a greater devotional surrender and compassion based on truly seeing the other for who they are, not as a means of inflating one's ego with how good I am. Sense of humor comes up here, and I think 7s have a great sense of humor in general, and so carrying that with them, I think, through the transformation process is really important. Sevens, as far as I can tell, don't really lose their feeling of lightness toward life. This is interesting, some therapeutic stuff. So sexual 7s in particular tend to come to therapy either due to an acute crisis they cannot escape from, or out of curiosity to experience a new toy for illusion or fantasy. And so the point here is that 7s frequently leave the therapeutic process or bail it, either because they feel like I'm done, I'm complete, or their curiosity sort of dries up. So it can be hard, Viator is saying here, to kind of get a 7 to have the perseverance to do deeper work, which I both have observed and also hear anecdotally from a bunch of sources. So the first piece of advice for therapists working with sexual 7s is to make them aware of the importance of creating a favorable environment for the development of perseverance, patience, and commitment to therapy so that the process can unfold. It can be helpful to recontract sessions periodically, can have like packages, prevent the process from being abruptly interrupted by an escape or rebellion, but leave the door open, right, so that they can resume the process another time. So 7s need that flexibility. 7s need to feel that freedom. 7s can't feel like the doors are closing on them. It's useful to stimulate their curiosity, leave them with a bit of hunger from one session to the next. I think that's a little bit, for me, too involved of a strategy, but it's interesting. The challenge is the intellectual side. Rationalization is a defense mechanism. Yeah, so with a 7 is going to really engage their intellectual side in the deeper work. And so the job to be done is to get the sevens connected to their body, to their feelings. It's about teaching the sexual seven little by little to be silent and listen to themselves from other levels. Earn their trust by showing the ability to hold their pain, sensitivity, fragility. Descent into pain, the plunge into the well, is usually a very delicate moment in the process. It has to do with remembering and mourning the past, childhood. It's a realization of the self-deception they've been immersed in and the time they lost. It's a recognition of vulnerability, insecurity, fear, the sense of abandonment and loneliness. At this point, much nurturing, understanding, encouragement, and hope will be needed to help them continue along that path. At this point, resistances may arise in the form of latenesses and absences until eventually they flee and never return. Therefore, it's important to have previously developed a solid and genuine bond based on trust. At this time, it's essential to anchor them in the sense that they find internal supports other than reason. Therapy will be an internal and external place where they can stop and rest. In any case, depressive states are a sign that the process is advancing. And so, here they've got more. Just don't overlook the seven's manipulations. They're going to get involved and gain confidence with a therapist. Again, sort of try to win over the therapist. This game must be progressively exposed and frustrated so that greater honesty can be expressed. And use their own mechanism, humor and irony, bearing in mind that sevens handle this very well. So all good stuff. And just a few points there that I wanted to add on. One, we haven't talked much about addiction yet in either the profiles of the seven, but addiction is prevalent with the seven, like alcohol, drugs kind of addiction. And I don't remember why that came up for me. Maybe just because it's so interestingly absent when that's sort of a classic reason why sevens might engage with deeper work is addiction issues, including not being able to handle addiction issues of family members, like not seeing addiction issues, not addressing addiction issues because of that avoidance. And again, the paradox of the Enneagram and inner work is that oftentimes the most pro-social types, sevens, threes, maybe twos, some twos, their inner work will be their shadow, right? The parts of themselves that they haven't allowed to come out because of how pro-social they are, those parts will be more antisocial or asocial. And so there may be resistance both internally and externally to that work. So Viatora mentioned depression as a good sign, right? But a seven, that's hard. That's hard for a seven to wrap their arms around depression and celebrate it as growth compared to other types that may be more antisocial or asocial. Their transformation sometimes may be celebrated a bit more. It's all so murky and unpredictable, but that's a key point that Suzanne Stabile makes is, a seven used to be so fun. Why aren't you fun anymore? Come on out, right? Like they have this extra burden on their inner work. So I think the point is well taken to spend so much time on the advice for therapists that Viatora has here, because the seven has a lot of obstacles to doing deeper work, and knowing those obstacles can help anyone who's, whether professionally or personally, trying to help a seven through their process. Okay, so that's the sexual seven, and we'll conclude the seven next time with the social seven. See ya.